All right, welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
We like to think of this show as like cutting through all the noise, the articles, the research,
Right.
and bringing you like the most important insights on a specific topic.
Absolutely.
Straight to the point, nice and fast.
Exactly. For all of you who want to get a good grasp on some of these subjects but don't have a ton of time,
Right, exactly.
we're going to be going on a deep dive today.
Exactly. We're diving deep today into something that's, I think, super fascinating, and it's just becoming more and more part of our lives every day.
Yes.
And that is artificial intelligence.
Right.
And specifically, how AI makes decisions.
Yeah. How do we even begin to understand AI?
Right. How do we even understand it?
That's really the big question here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of scary in a way.
It can be, especially with how fast it's developing.
Right.
It seems like every week there's a new breakthrough.
I know.
So in this deep dive, we're really trying to get to the heart of this question.
Yeah.
How can we peek inside the black box of AI
Yeah.
and really understand what's driving its choices?
Yeah. Like, what is going on in there? What's making these decisions?
Absolutely.
And to help us do this, we're going to be using this really great lecture from Hersh Shefrin
Right.
called AI and Bounded Rationality.
Bounded rationality decision-making models.
Yeah.
A fantastic lecture. Highly recommend it.
Yeah. And this lecture was originally given in Italy.
Yes, that's right.
So this just shows you how this is like a global conversation.
It really is. This isn't just something happening in Silicon Valley.
It's everywhere.
This is something that people all over the world are thinking about or concerned about.
Absolutely.
So this lecture is a fantastic roadmap for our deep dive today.
Absolutely.
We're going to be looking at, first of all, the foundational work of Herbert Simon.
Right.
Really one of the pioneers in how we think about decision-making.
Yeah, he kind of laid the groundwork for all this.
Both human decision-making and artificial decision-making.
Yeah, I mean, his ideas were really ahead of their time.
They really were.
From what I hear, he was talking about this stuff, like back in the 50s, 60s?
Yeah, long before AI was even really a thing.
Yeah.
And his ideas are still so relevant today.
I know, it's amazing.
So after we cover the foundational work of Herbert Simon,
Right.
we're going to move into really a game changer.
Okay.
A huge moment in the history of AI.
I'm excited. What is it?
That moment when Google's AlphaGo
Yeah.
beat the world champions at the game of Go.
Yeah.
I mean, people were shocked.
I remember that.
I mean, people were absolutely shocked.
Yeah, it was like, wait, what?
This was a huge deal.
Yeah, it was a really big deal.
And it made people completely rethink what AI was capable of.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a fascinating part of our deep dive.
Absolutely. And from there, I think we move into
Right.
the fact that the U.S. Congress is starting to look at regulating AI.
Exactly.
So, I mean,
it's gotten so big
this is huge.
that even the government is starting to pay attention.
Right.
They're holding hearings. They're trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah,
Because this stuff has a real impact on society.
it does.
And we need to start thinking about the implications.
Yeah.
So we'll touch upon that.
Okay.
And then a big focus, of course, is going to be on explainable AI, or as we call it, XAI.
Right. XAI.
And this is really the key, right?
Yeah.
How do we move beyond just seeing what an AI does, the output,
Right.
and actually understand its reasoning?
Yeah. How do we get inside its head?
Exactly.
How do we know why it's making the choices it's making?
We need to understand the why,
Right.
not just the what.
the why. Yeah.
And to really bring this to life, we'll be looking at some real-world examples,
Okay.
specifically the experiences of Zest Finance, a company using AI in the financial world,
Okay.
and some of the work that's happening at AI Fiddlers.
Okay.
Really an innovative company doing some cutting-edge stuff
Interesting.
in the field of XAI. So, these examples will give us a glimpse into the practical challenges,
Right.
the different approaches to
Yeah.
making AI more understandable.
Awesome.
And then finally, we'll be exploring this really interesting idea that Professor Shefrin emphasizes throughout the lecture,
Okay.
which is the idea that when it comes to understanding AI, sometimes less is more.
Less is more.
It's a counterintuitive idea,
Yeah.
but I think you'll find it fascinating.
I'm intrigued.
So, as you can see, we've got a lot to cover today,
We do.
all stemming from this one really insightful lecture.
Yeah, this is going to be a great deep dive, I can already tell.
I think so too.
Okay, so let's start off at the beginning with Herbert Simon.
Yeah.
So his work, what was so revolutionary about it?
Herbert Simon, he really changed how we think about decision making
Okay.
in the real world.
Okay.
His core idea, he called it bounded rationality.
Bounded rationality, okay.
So instead of that traditional economic view
Right.
of people being perfectly rational, having unlimited information, Simon recognized that in the real world, our decisions are limited.
Yeah, of course.
They're limited by the information we have,
Okay.
by our own cognitive abilities, how well we can think,
Right.
and also just simply the time we have to make a choice.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, think of it like you're trying to solve a massive puzzle,
Right.
but you only have some of the pieces,
Yeah.
and there's a ticking clock.
Yeah, that's a much better way to think about it.
You're under pressure, you don't have all the information,
Right.
you have to make the best decision you can with what you've got.
And that's a much more realistic view of how we actually make decisions. Right.
Exactly. We're not these supercomputers.
Right.
We're humans.
Yeah. And Professor Shefrin highlights two kind of main ideas that have
Yes.
come out of this whole concept of bounded rationality.
Uh-huh.
So what are those two main ideas?
Well, the first one is the less is more perspective.
Okay, less is more.
And this suggests that surprisingly often, simple rules of thumb, what we call heuristics,
Heuristics.
can
Seriously?
actually lead to really good decisions,
Wow, interesting.
even in really complex situations.
That's kind of counterintuitive.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. It's the idea that sometimes focusing on just a few key pieces of information
Right.
and using a simple decision process
Yeah.
can be more effective than trying to analyze every single detail.
So it's like sometimes overthinking things
Right.
is actually worse.
Can be, yeah.
Interesting.
Like fast and frugal trees are a good example of this.
Okay, what are fast and frugal trees?
They're basically straightforward decision trees
Okay.
that rely on just a limited number of cues.
So they cut through all the noise and just focus on the essentials.
Exactly, they're like a mental shortcut
Right,
to
right.
get to a good decision quickly.
So sometimes keeping it simple actually works better.
In a lot of cases, yeah.
That's fascinating.
It is. It really challenges how we traditionally think about decision making.
Okay, so that's one of the big ideas. What's the other main idea that kind of came out of Simon's work?
The other key stream of thought that emerged focuses on avoiding overconfidence.
Avoiding overconfidence. Okay.
Yeah, Simon's work reminds us that our knowledge is always limited,
Right.
and we need to be really cautious about being too sure of ourselves.
Yeah, especially when we're dealing with stuff we don't fully understand,
Exactly.
which is, I mean, a lot of things.
A lot of things in life.
Yeah, especially with AI, it's so complex.
It's incredibly complex.
Yeah.
So it's about recognizing our own blind spots,
Okay.
the potential for biases to creep in.
Right.
And this is especially relevant when we start talking about AI,
Correct.
because AI can exhibit biases as well.
Right. We'll definitely have to dig into that more.
We will. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, so both of these ideas, less is more,
Mhm.
and being wary of overconfidence,
Yeah.
they're really important when we start thinking about understanding and explaining AI, right?
Absolutely. They provide a really important framework.
Okay, so with that foundation laid by Simon,
Yes.
let's jump to this
Uh,
moment that really seemed to shift the whole perception of AI,
yes.
and that was Google's AlphaGo beating the world champions
Yes.
at the game of Go.
At Go.
It was like something out of science fiction.
It really was.
It was crazy.
And Professor Shefrin points out
Yeah.
that the reaction, particularly in places like South Korea and China,
Oh, right. Yeah, where Go is like
huge.
a really big deal.
It's like a cultural touchstone.
Yeah, it's much more than just a game in those countries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the reaction was immense
I can imagine.
because Go is such a complex game.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to play it. It's so hard.
It is
It's like so many more possible moves than chess.
far more.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah.
And it really relies on intuition,
Yeah.
strategic thinking.
Right.
And these were things that were long considered uniquely human.
Yeah, that's what's so crazy about it.
Like, this is what separates us from machines. So for an AI to come along and beat the best human players,
Yeah.
it really challenged that whole idea
Yeah, it really did.
head on.
And it wasn't just that it won, it was
Right.
the way it won, right?
Right.
Like, it made these moves that seemed totally unexpected.
Completely unexpected.
Even to the best Go players in the world.
Even the grandmasters were like, what is going on here?
Yeah, it must have been really mind-bending to watch that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And this brings us back to Simon's concept of ecological rationality.
Okay, ecological rationality, what's that?
So ecological rationality is how well a decision-making strategy adapts to the real-world environment. So if an AI can come up with strategy,
Yeah.
that even the best human minds hadn't considered.
Right.
It suggests that maybe our own intuition wasn't always the best guide.
Wow. Okay, so we're not as smart as we think we are.
It might not be about being smart.
Okay.
It's about the way we approach the problem.
Right.
Maybe our way of thinking, our intuition, isn't always the most optimal.
Okay, so AI might be able to find solutions that we just haven't thought of because we're stuck in our ways.
Exactly. It's like seeing the world from a completely different perspective.
That's a really interesting way to think about it.
Professor Shefrin even quotes the South Korean Go champion,
Oh, yeah.
Lee Sedol.
Okay.
And right before the match, Lee Sedol expressed strong belief that human intuition would still prevail.
Oh, wow.
He was very confident.
Yeah.
And then he lost.
Oh, man.
So,
Yeah, that's gotta be tough.
talk about a turning point.
It was a huge turning point.
This was a big moment for AI.
Yeah.
And Professor Shefrin pulls out a couple of really interesting observations from this.
Okay.
First of all, he suggests that whenever someone says they're confident,
Yeah.
we might want to mentally add over in front of it,
Overconfident, haha.
because often that's what it is.
Yeah, people tend to be a little overconfident, especially experts.
Especially experts, right?
Yeah.
They think they know more than they do.
Right.
And his second observation was, how could Lee Sedol have been so certain,
Right.
given that Garry Kasparov had already lost to Deep Blue in chess years earlier?
Yeah, good point.
You would think that would have been a warning sign.
Right. That AI was getting really good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So why was he so confident?
Yeah, that's a good question.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
And this brings us to this idea of availability bias.
Okay, availability bias, what's that?
So availability bias is our tendency
Yeah.
to give more weight to information that comes readily to mind.
Okay, so like stuff that's easy to remember.
Right, stuff that's recent,
Yeah.
stuff that's vivid,
Okay.
things that stand out.
Right, right.
So perhaps the loss in chess, while significant,
Yeah.
didn't feel as directly relevant
Okay.
to the very different and seemingly more intuitive game of Go.
So it's like, oh yeah, AI can beat humans at chess, but Go is different. That's more of an art.
Exactly, they didn't connect the dots.
Right.
So AlphaGo's victory really forced people to rethink things on a global scale.
Yeah.
It was a huge wake-up call.
Yeah, it was like, whoa, AI is getting really good.
It really was.
We need to pay attention.
Absolutely.
This is not a joke.
Exactly. And it spurred a lot of new investment and research in the field.
Right, because people saw the potential.
They saw the potential, but they also saw the potential dangers.
Yeah, it's both exciting and scary at the same time.
It's a double-edged sword.
Okay, so with all this attention on AI,
Yeah.
I guess it's no surprise that the US Congress is starting to look at regulating it.
Yeah, it was only a matter of time.
Yeah.
The fact that lawmakers are actually holding hearings on this
Right.
shows that it's not just some theoretical thing anymore.
Right, it's having a real impact on society.
It's affecting people's lives
Yeah.
in very real ways.
Okay, so Professor Shefrin mentions that
Yeah.
Douglas Merrill,
Uh-huh.
who founded Zest Finance.
Yes. And he was the CIO of Google previously.
Right.
So he testified at one of these congressional hearings.
Okay.
And his testimony brought up this really critical legal aspect in the US,
Okay, what's that?
the Fair Credit Reporting Act.
Okay, I've heard of that.
So this law requires lenders
Yeah.
to give specific reasons when they deny someone credit.
Right, so you can't just say no without explaining why.
Exactly. You have to give people an explanation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But this creates a direct conflict
Okay.
with the whole black box nature of some AI systems.
Right, because if the AI just says no to a loan application
Right.
without explaining why, how can the lender comply with the law?
Exactly. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And more importantly,
Sure.
how can the person who was denied credit understand what they need to do to improve their chances in the future?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not just about the law, it's about fairness, too.
Exactly. People need to know why they were denied
Yeah.
so they can take steps to fix the problem.
Right. It's not helpful to just get a no with no explanation.
It's like a dead end. Yeah, exactly.
So this legal requirement
Okay.
provides a really strong incentive to develop what we call explainable AI in areas like finance.
Right, because you have to be able to explain the decision.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not enough for an AI to just be accurate
Okay.
in predicting who might default on a loan.
Right.
It also needs to be transparent
Yeah.
enough to actually explain its reasoning,
Right, so we can understand why it made the decision it made.
especially when those decisions have such a big impact on people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this legal pressure, along with the increasing capabilities of AI,
Yeah.
is really driving the need for this explainable AI.
Right, for XAI.
So for next AI.
But what exactly is XAI trying to achieve?
Yeah, what is it?
And what are some of the ways people are trying to make AI more understandable?
Right.
Like, what are the actual methods they're using?
So at its heart, XAI is about taking these complex AI models,
Okay.
particularly these deep learning neural networks.
Which work through these many layers of interconnected processing units.
Right, it's like a brain.
It's very brain-like, very complex.
Yeah.
And it can be really hard to understand what's going on inside.
Yeah, how do you even begin to unpack that?
Right. So XAI is trying to find ways to generate explanations
Right.
that humans can actually grasp.
Yeah, because if you can't understand it, how can you trust it?
Exactly.
Right.
And Professor Shefrin points out that unlike older, more formula-based AI models,
Okay.
where you could often see exactly how the different factors were contributing to the outcome,
Yeah.
these deep learning models are much more opaque.
Okay, so like you can't see
You
inside.
can't see inside.
Yeah.
Their inner workings are hidden.
Right.
It's like trying to figure out how a really intricate clock works
Yeah.
just by looking at the movement of the hands.
Right, you need to see the gears,
You see the gears, the springs,
the inner working.
exactly, the inner workings.
Okay, so one of the early approaches in XAI, I think Professor Shefrin mentioned this,
Yeah.
involved this concept of Shapley values.
Shapley value?
From the game theory.
Some
No,
game theory, yeah.
I've heard of that, but I don't really understand it.
It's a fascinating concept.
Okay.
So the Shapley value
Yeah.
was developed by Lloyd Shapley, a Nobel laureate.
Okay.
And it's essentially a way to fairly distribute the payoff among members of a team
Okay.
based on their individual contributions.
So it's like if you have a team working on a project,
Right.
the Shapley value figures out who contributed the most.
Exactly. Who deserves the most credit?
Okay, so how does that apply to AI?
Right. So in this analogy,
Yeah.
the different input features
Okay.
or pieces of information that the AI uses to make a decision,
Yeah.
those are like the team members.
Okay.
And the payoff is the AI's final prediction or decision
Okay, so it's like the input features are working together
Right.
to make a decision.
to achieve a goal.
Right.
And the Shapley value is trying to figure out, okay, which feature contributed the most to that decision?
So it's trying to quantify the impact of each individual piece of information.
That's the basic idea, yeah.
Okay.
By calculating these Shapley values,
Yeah.
you can get a sense of which factors were most important
Right.
in driving the AI's decision.
Okay, so it gives you like a ranking of importance.
In a way, yeah.
Okay, so Professor Shefrin uses this example of a hiring manager
Right.
named Enrico,
Enrico.
and he's making hiring decisions
Yes.
based on gender,
Huh?
male,
Male?
and lifting ability.
Right.
So he only wants to hire men who can lift heavy things.
That seems to be his criteria.
Okay, so how do Shapley values help us understand Enrico's decisions?
So by analyzing Enrico's hiring decisions,
Okay.
using Shapley values,
Yeah.
we can try to understand how much weight he's giving to each of these criteria,
Okay.
even if he doesn't explicitly state his rules.
So it's like we're reverse engineering his decision-making process.
Exactly. We're trying to figure out what's going on in his head
Right, just by looking at the outcome.
by looking at the data. Yeah,
Okay, that's pretty cool.
it is. It's a powerful tool.
Yeah, but Professor Shefrin goes on to explain that using Shapley values in XAI isn't always a perfect solution.
Right. It's not a magic bullet.
Okay, so what are some of the limitations?
Well, this brings us to the real-world experience of Zest Finance.
Okay, Zest Finance.
Yeah, the company we mentioned earlier.
Right.
So Professor Shefrin mentions that Jay Budzik,
Uh-huh.
the CTO of Zest Finance,
Okay.
published a critique
Okay.
of relying solely on Shapley values
Okay.
to explain machine learning models for credit decisions.
So he had some issues with it.
He did, yeah.
Okay. What were some of the main things he brought up?
So he argued that when you're dealing with something as sensitive and regulated as credit lending,
Yeah, you got to be careful.
there are a lot of practical considerations
Right.
that standard Shapley value calculations don't automatically address.
Okay, so it's not just a plug and play solution.
Right? You can't just plug in the numbers and expect a perfect explanation.
Okay, what kind of practical considerations are we talking about?
Well, things like how you account for different groups of applicants,
Okay,
how you relate the explanations back to the actual credit score,
right.
and even the way you sample data.
Okay.
All of these things can significantly impact the Shapley values you get.
So it's more complicated than it seems.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
And he essentially felt that off-the-shelf Shapley value calculations could miss some really important nuances,
Okay.
especially in a field like credit lending.
Right, where the stakes are so high.
Exactly, where a wrong decision can have huge consequences for people.
Absolutely.
He also raised this really fundamental point about fairness
Okay.
and how lenders need to be able to provide reasons for denial.
Right, we talked about that earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So while Shapley values can tell you which factors were important
Okay.
in an individual decision, lenders also need to be able to compare outcomes for different groups of people.
Right, to make sure there's no bias.
Exactly, to ensure fairness.
Okay.
And Zest Finance argued that the standard Shapley framework wasn't really set up to facilitate those kinds of comparisons.
So it was good at explaining individual decisions.
Yeah.
But not so good at looking at the bigger picture.
Right, the overall fairness of the system.
Okay, that makes sense.
So they felt that while Shapley values might provide a mathematical understanding of the model, they didn't always give the most useful or legally relevant explanations for the specific needs of the lending industry.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
It's like you need a different tool for a different job.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, Professor Shefrin does note that Scott Lundberg,
Okay.
who created the SHAP method, which is Shapley additive explanation, offered a response to Zest Finance's concerns.
Okay.
And suggested that maybe there were some other factors influencing their perspective.
Okay, so there's some debate going on here.
There's always debate in the scientific community.
Right.
It's how we get closer to the truth.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's not one agreed upon way to approach XAI.
Right, it's still an evolving field.
Yeah, it's still early days.
And there are a lot of different ideas out there.
Okay, so we've got this push and pull between wanting a really solid mathematical framework like Shapley values and the need for explanations that are actually useful.
Right, and make sense to humans.
Yeah, that are intuitive.
And are legally compliant.
Right.
And help us address these issues of fairness.
Yeah, it's a lot to juggle.
It is. It's a complex problem.
Okay, so let's talk about AI Fiddlers.
Yes.
A company that Professor Shefrin highlights for their kind of innovative approach to XAI.
Yes, they're doing some really interesting work.
And they also use ideas from game theory, right?
They do, yeah.
Okay.
But with a slightly different emphasis.
Okay.
Really embracing that less is more principle.
Ah, there it is again. Less is more.
It's a powerful idea.
So how are they applying this less is more idea to explaining AI?
So they suggest that instead of trying to analyze the full complexity of how all the input features interact, which is what those standard Shapley-based methods often try to do, they say, let's focus on smaller, more manageable pieces of information.
Okay, break it down a bit. Simplify it.
So they particularly emphasize using marginal probabilities.
Marginal probabilities. Okay, what are those?
So marginal probability is essentially the probability of a single feature being present.
Okay.
Without considering all the relationships to the other features.
So you're just looking at that one feature in isolation?
In a simplified sense, yes.
Okay.
And by concentrating on these individual contributions, they argue that you can often get explanations that are much easier for humans to understand.
Okay.
Even if the underlying AI model is super complex.
So again, it's this idea that simpler explanations can be more powerful.
Right, because they're more digestible.
Right.
They even suggest that in some cases, you might not even need to know the full historical data.
Wow. Okay.
You could potentially use a much simpler method.
Okay.
With equal probabilities for each feature.
Right.
And still get a pretty good relative understanding of which features are most important.
So you don't need all the data, just the essential pieces.
Sometimes, yeah. That's what they're proposing.
Wow, that's really interesting.
It is. It challenges a lot of our assumptions about how to explain these complex systems.
Yeah, it's like saying that sometimes less data leads to more understanding.
It sounds counterintuitive.
It does.